The topic for tonight is the B-36 Peacemaker. Just for people who are familiar with the aircraft, my talk might seem a bit unbalanced in that it focuses entirely on the bomber version and it doesn't address the reconnaissance versions or the special projects and aircraft that were derived from the B-36. The main reason for that being that none of us want to be here until midnight tonight, so I thought I'd just focus on the bomber. And maybe in the fullness of time, as they used to say in the civil service, Sir Humphrey Appleby from Yes Minister, I might do part two, which would focus on those two areas. Okay, unofficially dubbed the Peacemaker, the B-36 was operated by the US Air Force from 1949 to 1959 and was the largest mass-produced piston-engine aircraft ever built. Measuring 230 feet, 70 metres, the wingspan of the B-36 was the longest of any combat aircraft. No combat aircraft had a larger wingspan. This made it possible for the Peacemaker to carry sufficient fuel to be capable of intercontinental flight without refueling. Now, obviously, to accommodate so much fuel, most of it was in the wings, you needed a pretty darn big aircraft. And you can see here, obviously, to the right-hand side of the screen, is the B-36. That is an early version, probably an A or a B model. But I'm plumping for A or B because there are no jets, only 6 piston engines. Next to it, up here, you've got the B-29, which is about half the size of the B-36. The B-17, which is even smaller, and the tiddler over in the top right is the B-18 Bolo, the aircraft the Army Air Corps didn't want but got saddled with anyway in the late 30s. Yes, the poor thing was rather ugly, and that was because it was basically a derivative of the DC-2 commercial airliner. Anyway, let's not wander off the track. Throughout most of the 1950s, the B-36 was the primary US Air Force aircraft for delivering nuclear weapons to targets in the USSR and I guess also after 1949 in Communist China. This was by virtue of its 4,000-mile combat radius. You can see this significantly sized pickup truck there, single cab with a tray back, classic American farm stock vehicle, and it looks like a dinky toy or a corgi toy next to the B-36. That's a particularly good ground view in colour, one of the few that I'm afraid I was able to come across. As majestic as the B-36 was, in flight in particular, we can't forget that its primary purpose was to deliver atomic and hydrogen bombs to targets in the heartland of the United States' various enemies. The B-36 design, however, was more evolutionary than revolutionary, and this is well illustrated by comparing the images of the B-36 with both the B-50, the bomber it replaced, and the all-jet B-52 that eventually replaced it. So you've got the B-50 here. This thing was basically a souped-up B-29. It had the same armament layout, but it had more powerful engines. In fact, the B-50 used the same engines that the B-36 did. And it had a much taller tail than its predecessor, the B-29. But you can see pretty standard layout. It's got drop tanks on the end there, which most bombers in World War II didn't have, but it's no great advance on the B-29, for example. That was the B-36 in flight. That is an A model, basically because it has no tail guns and no nose guns. The A model was unarmed, could carry some conventional ordnance, but was not fitted to carry nuclear bombs. In fact, none of the B-36s in the early models were nuclear capable. They had to be modified after they entered service to carry the early atomic bombs. Then when we look at the aircraft that replaced the B-36, we come to the B-52. Now you can see that in comparison is a revolutionary design. Swept back wing, 8 jet engines. That is probably a D model, but I can't be absolutely sure because one of the problems with the 36 and the 52 was the early models, or virtually all models, look very similar. You can't tell them apart. But you can see there that there's a bit of a continuum, but the 36 was certainly not revolutionary. The B-52 began to enter service in increasing numbers towards the end of the 50s, from 55 onwards, resulting in the gradual phasing out of the B-36. The last B-36 was retired from active duty in January 1959, and most had been scrapped by 1961, with the exception of 4 museum exhibits in the US which remain on public display today. Development. The genesis of the B-36 can be traced back to April 1941, so we're going back into the beginning of the 40s, when the US Army Air Force issued a requirement for an intercontinental bomber with a cruising speed of 275 miles an hour, a service ceiling of 45,000 feet, and a range of 12,000 miles. At this time, there was a fear amongst US military and political leaders that the Nazis might still invade and conquer Britain. If this occurred and the US entered the war against Germany, it would mean that the US Army Air Force would have to fly bombing missions against targets in Western Europe from bases located in Newfoundland off the east coast of Canada. And in fact, the range of 12,000 miles was based on a Newfoundland-Berlin round trip. It soon became clear, however, that the original specification far exceeded the technology of the day. In August 41, the specification was revised to a cruising speed of 240 miles an hour, service ceiling of 40,000, and a combat radius of 4,000 miles when fully armed. And the later models of B-36 just about got to that, okay? Even the revised specifications were extremely challenging, and the first prototype, designated XB-36, did not fly until August 1946, nearly a full year after the end of World War II. The second prototype, the YB-36, flew 15 months later in December 1947. So you're looking at a fairly long gestation period of between 5 to 6 years. Just to illustrate that, that's the XB. Two things I'd like to point out. One is the stepped cockpit arrangement and the relatively small nose cap. And of course the very, very large main landing gear. Those tyres were 110 inches in diameter. You can see 4 engineers, and these guys are not short. I think this bloke here probably getting up to 6 foot, and he only comes up to the top of the steel inner rim of the tyre. Okay, so these were big tyres. The first 2 prototypes were fitted with those tyres, but they were subsequently refitted with that 4 bogey landing gear. This guy looks like he's about 6 foot, but the wheels come up roughly to his chest. There's a mechanic up there, in case you didn't pick it up. He's hanging on for dear life to the support strut of the main wheel strut. Not exactly sure what he's doing. I think it's probably a posed photograph. These illustrations show the changes between the XB and the YB and B-36A in terms of nose development and also in terms of main landing gear. B-36 production totaled 385 aircraft between 1945 and 1954. That includes the prototypes, obviously. The B-36 was produced in 2 basic variants, a dedicated bomber variant and a reconnaissance bomber variant. The reconnaissance bomber versions, designated RB-36, accounted for almost a third of total B-36 production. The RB-36 was equipped to carry out both photographic and electronic reconnaissance, and this involved pre-strike, post-strike photography, and also monitoring, recording and analysing Soviet radar and radio transmissions. The reconnaissance version of the B-36 was not initially intended to have a bombing capability, so all 4 bomb bays were dedicated to the reconnaissance task. The B-36A, don't fear, I'm only going to look at 3 models in any detail, because once we get past the D, they're all the same, except for minor variations. The first production version was the A. These were not combat capable. They lacked defensive armament and the ability to deliver atomic weapons. Initially, they were used for crew familiarization and development work. The A models were powered only by piston engines, and these consisted of 6 Pratt & Whitney R4360 28-cylinder engines, each developing 3,000 horsepower. So you're looking at 6 times 3, 18,000 horsepower pushing this thing along. Subsequently, 21 B-36As and the sole YB-36 were remanufactured as RB-36Es. These aircraft had to go through virtually a complete rebuild to make them.
Sorry, who manufactured them?
Sorry?
Who manufactured?
Convair. Now, which was quite convenient for both Convair and the Air Force, because the first base to host the first 2 B-36 groups was Carswell Air Force Base near Lake Worth in Texas. And the Convair plant was basically operating adjacent to it. So that simplified getting spare parts and having aircraft remanufactured and so on. That's the B-36A again in its original form, identifiable by the fact there's no nose and tail turrets. The other point I would make about this aircraft is that it exhibits the classic trait of the bomber. Fuselage-wise, the bomber variants were very clean aircraft. There's only one bulge just to the lower left of the buzz number down here, and that was for the main AN/APS 23 or 24 radar, which supplied information to the navigation and bombing system. But there are no other lumps and bumps on it, okay? But if you look at the next slide, which shows a B-36 that has been remanufactured as an RB-36, well, it's a different story. You've got 1, 2, 3 antenna radomes there, covering the aerials to pick up radar and radio communication. You've got another one under the chin of the bomber in the nose there, and of course this one is the main radar for the navigation and bombing. But that's how you tell a bomber from a reconnaissance aircraft in the case of the B-36. The B-36 began to enter service with Strategic Air Command's 7th Bomb Wing in June 1948, eventually equipping 7 bomb wings and 3 strategic reconnaissance wings. Some books will tell you it was 4 wings, but the 4th wing was never fully operational. I think only 1 squadron achieved operational status before it was used for something else. Each bomb wing consisted of 3 squadrons, with each squadron initially operating 10 B-36 aircraft. But this number increased as production ramped up. I think they probably got to about 15 aircraft a squadron. The SAC commander during most of the B-36's operation was General Curtis E. LeMay, and he commanded Strategic Air Command that controlled the B-36 from 1948 to 1957. The next model off the production line was the B-36B. A total of 62 were built. Unlike the A model, the B was combat capable, being equipped with defensive armament, and it could carry both nuclear and conventional weapons. Like the A, however, the B model was also powered by 6-piston engines, and the introduction of jet engines would have to wait till the D, or wouldn't occur until the D model onwards. And again, you can see tail guns, nose guns, and the rather attractive red tail and wingtips was applied to aircraft that were basically operating out of the northern parts of the United States, mainly Alaska. Okay, so the theory being that if the plane crashed, the red markings would be easier to see from the sky. One of the B-36 claims to fame was its involvement in the US Air Force's first Broken Arrow, a code name for an accident involving nuclear weapons. This occurred on February 13th, 1950, when a B-36B on a training flight from Alaska to San Francisco encountered severe icing conditions over Western Canada. 2 of the aircraft's 6 engines also caught fire. The weight of ice on the wings and the loss of 2 engines meant that the B-36 was unable to maintain altitude. By the time the bomber was over the Pacific coast of Canada, the aircraft commander, Captain Barry, made the decision to jettison the atomic weapon being carried into the Pacific Ocean, and he also ordered the crew to bail out. Depending on which source you consult, the weapon that the B-36 was carrying was either a Mark III Fat Man type fission bomb, that's very close to the one dropped on Nagasaki in August 1945, or a Mark IV. Both bombs, though you can't see it very clearly on this one, had nose doors that could be opened. And basically the plutonium core was inserted to arm the bomb through that nose door using special tools. Now, SAC aircraft did carry nuclear weapons on a regular basis, the argument being that that would give ground crews practice in loading them and air crews practice in flying them around safely, in theory, and it would be beneficial overall to Strategic Air Command. If we look at this is a Mark 5, which definitely wasn't carried, but you can see the nose doors open, right? And you can put, that's how they inserted the plutonium core. The bomb was duly jettisoned, minus its 13-pound plutonium core, and its implosion charges subsequently detonated at 3,000 feet, destroying the weapon. In order to make a nuclear or an atomic bomb work, you have to have a implosion or squashing, inward pushing pressure or explosive pressure of normal TNT or normal explosives, which then crushes the core, plutonium core down, initiates a chain reaction and gives you the uncontrolled fission explosion. I'm not a nuclear scientist, but that's my understanding anyway. 12 of the 17-man crew were eventually recovered on Princess Royal Island, whilst the remaining 5 are believed to have perished in the Pacific. 3 years later, however, the wreckage of the B-36 was located in a very remote area of British Columbia, some 200 miles from the position at which it was supposed to have crashed into the Pacific Ocean. So, you know, that raises a pretty large question mark. A US Air Force recovery team was immediately airlifted into the crash site within hours to recover any classified material and possibly the plutonium core. 13 pounds of plutonium is a reasonable amount. You wouldn't want that falling into the wrong hands. They also used explosive charges to destroy the remaining wreckage of the B-36. Even today, 75 years later, there are many unanswered questions concerning this incident. But that's the first of the broken arrows. It's hard to know whether to laugh or cry when you read through a brief description of each of these broken arrows, because some of them are just, you've got to shake your head in disbelief. The B-36, which was the definitive variant, the main visible difference between the 36 and the A and B models was the addition of jet power to the aircraft. This was done by adding pairs of General Electric J-47 jets mounted in pods under the Peacemaker's wings just before the piston engines. And you can see there's the third piston engine there, and just a little, oh no, it's there. And just a little bit of way along, you've got the jet pod, okay? Each jet engine developed 5,200 pounds of thrust. The jet pods were very similar to those manufactured for the inboard engines of the B-47. Very little difference between them.
Did they take the same fuel?
Yes, yeah, I'm coming to that. Yes, you're quite right. The jet pods and the piston engines did use the same fuel. And basically, as a result of this, there was no requirement for a separate fuel system for the jet pods. The jets were only used during takeoff, climb to operating altitude, and to provide limited dash capability over the target. They were usually shut down at other times. Each jet had these, I'll get on the other side, had these adjustable shutters that were deployed when the jet was shut down, usually on the ground, but also in the air when they were just at cruising altitude and chugging along. they let in just enough air to keep the turbines in the jet body itself turning, so it prevented the build-up of ice. You can see here the shutters are fully retracted, here they're fully extended. So that was quite an interesting bit of technology, I thought. The addition of jets raised the B-36D's top speed to 406 miles an hour and its ceiling to 44,000 feet. So that's sort of getting over where the original specification specified or laid down. The jets also came in handy if a Peacemaker lost 2 or more piston engines on the same wing. The pair of jets on the affected wing could be started, making it possible for the aircraft to reach its base in an emergency field. The D model was also fitted with snap-action bomb bay doors that could open and close in the space of 2 seconds. This type of bomb door reduced the drag on the bomb run. You've got the snap-action doors there for bomb bays 1 and 2. Because each set of doors covered 2 bomb bays. There was 1 set at the front, 1 set at the back for the 2 rear bomb bays. Jet pods are there. It was not uncommon for B-36s to come back from training missions with at least 1, if not more, piston engines out. Engine fires were common, and obviously they'd had to shut the engines down to prevent serious damage. There was one case, however, where a burning engine, the fire couldn't be put out, and the fire actually burnt through the engine mounts and the whole engine just fell off. The aircraft made it back to base, but they were reasonably tough old birds, the B-36. Okay, just to finish off the Ds. 59 B models were converted to either B-36Ds or RB-36D standard, while new build D models numbered 22 for the bombers and 24 for the reconnaissance aircraft. With its 10 engines, 6 turning and 4 burning, the B-36 standardised the external appearance of the Peacemaker. You could always tell the reconnaissance bombers apart, but it was very difficult after the D to tell the difference between a bomber of the D model or a bomber of the F model or one of the H model or one of the J model, because they all look the same. Both variants of the B-36 required large flight crews. That's the reconnaissance and the bomber version. The bomber version carried 15 to 16 crewmen, but it was not uncommon to have more than that, with specialists and senior officers riding as check pilots and so on. So the reconnaissance variants had crews of 22 or more, with the extra personnel consisting of photographic and signals intelligence specialists who were responsible for carrying out the reconnaissance task. Here you've got the flight crew of a B-36, so it's a bomber version. I can't see any radomes on the back of the fuselage. So, and there are 20 guys. I've counted them a couple of times. There are 20 blokes there, and that's for a bomber version. So, you know, the recon versions carry much more. The internal layout of the B-36 remained largely unchanged during the bomber's career. Consisted of 2 pressurised compartments, one in the nose and the other in the rear fuselage, forward of the tail. These compartments were physically connected by a pressurised tunnel that ran along the lower part of the port fuselage's interior. So basically, it would the tunnel would run roughly from here to about there on the inside of the fuselage. So that's the layout. You can see from the diagram that things got pretty crowded in the front compartment because you had about 11 different blokes in there at least, whereas the gunners in the tail compartment pretty much had the place to themselves. They also had the crew comforts, the electric stove and the bunk beds that they could sack out on, so they weren't doing too badly at all. When transferring from one compartment to the other, crewmen had to lie on their back on a movable cart located within the tunnel. They then had to haul themselves through the tunnel by pulling on a rope strung across the tunnel ceiling until they reached the other compartment. And you can see the guy here, I don't know if he's probably an Air Force guy. He's on the little cart there, which appears to be connected to two rails at the bottom of the tunnel. He's lying on his back and he's pulling himself through the tunnel using the rope. Apparently this procedure was not recommended during rough weather. That's that. The nose compartment was divided into two levels, by the way, with the upper level containing the two pilots and one or two flight engineers. The lower level was very cramped and contained the navigator, bombardier, radio operator, radar operator and nose gunner. You can see there that it is fairly a tight squeeze. I had another colour slide which showed a reconnaissance bomber's lower nose compartment, and there were 4 guys squeezed in there. But even just in the bomber, you can see these blokes are cheek to jowl, and there's no room to swing a cat. The rear compartment contained 5 gunners. These included 6 bunks for rest and a galley with a 4-burner, some books say 2, electric stove on which food could be prepared. And you've got a diagram there of the rear compartment, 2, 4, 6 bunks. That's the corner of the electric stove where they could heat up food. These 2 positions here are the upper scanning positions for 2 gunners, one on the left, one on the right, and you've got the lower scanning position here. There would be a duplicate position on the other side of these bunks, and that position there was used by the rear gunner. So, and of course you can see the toilet facilities provided. Must have got extremely cramped for 22 guys. Here's a couple of blokes, probably a propaganda shot, but they're cooking something on a 2-burner stove, electric stove by the look of it. There seems to be a fume extractor there. And they're obviously in the back compartment of the bomber. Offensive armament. The B-36 could carry a wide range of both conventional and nuclear weapons. Conventional warloads range from 100-pound flash bombs for night photography all the way up to the 12,000-pound Tarzan bomb and the 42,000-pound T-12 bomb. That's the Tarzan there. It was based on the 12-boy bomb developed by Barnes Wallis, UK, and it was fitted with control surfaces which allowed it to be guided to its target using radio signals. There was a dirty great big flare in the back of the bomb, and a bomb aimer with a joystick sat in the B-36, and when the bomb was released, the flare lit and the bombardier could see where the bomb was going and steer it accordingly. Very similar to the system that the Germans developed in World War II for their Henschel type flying bombs, as opposed to a V1, okay? Not the same thing. The T-12 was the largest conventional bomb in the US infantry at the time, but was never used operationally. And you can see you've got a couple of guys there for scale, how big this thing was. The B-36 could lug around 2 of those. The Peacemaker also carried a variety of nuclear weapons for both the fission and fusion types. Fission bombs included the Mark 3, 4, 5 and 6 and 8 atomic bombs, while the principal fusion weapon was the Mark 17. And there's the Mark 17 there, all 42,000 pounds of it. It was 25 feet long and 5 feet in diameter, with a yield of 10 to 15 million tons of TNT. It could only be carried by the B-36. No other aircraft in the US infantry was capable of carrying it. Subsequent hydrogen bombs were much smaller and could be carried by the B-52, B-47 and so on, but this thing could only be carried by the 36. The weapon was involved in the second broken arrow associated with the B-36. This occurred in May 57 when a Mark 17 came loose from its bomb shackles and crashed through the B-36's bomb doors. This is while the aircraft was in flight. Fortunately, the weapon was not armed, and only its conventional explosives detonated, thus avoiding a nuclear catastrophe. The B-36 in question went into a steep climb due to the sudden loss of 42,000 pounds of weight. However, the pilots were able to regain control and landed the aircraft without further incident. You have to wonder about their armament inspection protocols, that could have happened. You would think that after the bomb was loaded, a senior engineer would come around, ground engineer, and actually check that it had been done properly, but apparently not. Defensive armament. The B-36 defended itself with no less than 16 20mm cannon, concentrated in 8 twin-gun turrets. These consisted of turrets in the nose and tail, together with 6 fully retractable fuselage turrets. The latter consisted of 2 pairs of dorsal turrets and 1 pair of ventral turrets. I'll just run through these. The fuselage turrets, as I said, were all retractable. Now you see them, now you don't. Basically what happened was that they retracted inwards and a sliding aluminium cover came up from the sides of the fuselage and covered over the hole where the turrets were. And there were 6 of those fuselage turrets. You can see there the nose turret pretty clearly, and you can see the 2 fuselage turrets, the forward fuselage dorsal turrets behind the cockpit. I think it's an RB-36H, but don't quote me. This is quite, I came across this purely by accident on the internet, because it's very, very hard to find clear quality images of both the rear dorsal and rear ventral turrets deployed. But you can see the twin dorsal turrets. You can see the twin dorsals here, 220mm, 220mm. I can only see one ventral with its 220mm, but the other one may be still retracted, or it might be extended but with the guns pointing horizontally or pointing up, so you can't see it. It's masked by its partner piece. So it was the most heavily armed bomber ever to fly, basically. Tail guns, and you've got the radar antennas there behind these twin circular hemispherical covers that showed up on the gunner's radar scope. Additional defensive systems included chaff dispensers that released strips of foil intended to confuse enemy radar and radar warning receivers to alert the crew of the approach of enemy fighters. In addition, the B-36 was also equipped with a variety of electronic countermeasure devices to jam enemy radar and communication transmissions. Okay, the whole gun system itself was remotely controlled, and it was based on a system that was first developed for the B-26. But what the gunners found, that while the B-26 system was fine for tracking Japanese fighters that travelled around 350 miles an hour, it didn't do so good against MiG-15s that flew at 600 miles an hour. And it is likely that the B-36 gunners would have had the same problem. The principal adversaries of the B-36 would have been the Soviet MiG-15 and MiG-17 fighters. That's a MiG-15 in Soviet insignia. Both aircraft flew at high subsonic speeds in the 600 to 700 mile per hour range and could easily reach the Peacemaker's operating altitude of 40 to 45,000 feet. They were also armed with 23mm and 37mm cannon, while the MiG-17 was also equipped with airborne radar. And if you have a look here, this little semi-spherical device here, which is in the middle of the jet intake, that was where the radar was housed. Okay, so daylight attacks against Soviet bombers would have consequently been extremely hazardous for the B-36. Even though attacks at night or in bad weather may have been more successful, the Peacemaker crews would have still had to have contended with the radar-equipped MiG-17. The other problem that the B-36 crews had was contrails. On a clear, fine day, the B-36 produced massive contrails. So if one of these aircraft was flying into Russia on a fine, clear day, who needs radar? All you'd have to do is to direct the MiG-15 to the approximate position of the B-36, and he'd have a dirty, great big contrail stretching for miles and miles that he'd be able to follow straight to the bomber. So, you know, teething troubles. The introduction of the B-36 was far from smooth. Engine failure and loss of electrical power while airborne became common problems, and on some occasions contribute to the loss of aircraft during training missions. The B-36 was maintenance heavy, and most individual aircraft spent a significant amount of their service life either in deep maintenance or modification programs that were carried out by the manufacturer Convair or by the US Air Force. In fact, the B-36 and each of the models seem to be constantly modified with this change or that change. The massive size of the B-36 also required the development of specialist ground support equipment so that maintenance could be carried out. Now that's an image of a service tower that was used, a 50-foot service tower that was used to service the 47-foot tail of the aircraft. This tower had special multiple walkways and had to be used by the mechanics as they worked on the aircraft's tail, rudder, rear turret. You can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 levels, and there are ladders joining each level where the guys went up and did what they had to do. So you're looking at quite a big investment in ground support equipment. Probably the biggest investment, however, was the maintenance docks for the engines and inner wings. Special maintenance docks also had to be used when mechanics worked on the aircraft's engines and wings. These docks were either mobile or fixed and contain inbuilt electrical power, lighting, heating and work platforms. There was also a specialist maintenance dock used for the nose and cockpit area. The B-36 was hit with a natural disaster, believe it or not. On September 1st, 1952, a tornado struck Carswell Air Force Base in Texas. Carswell was the base for the 7th and 11th SAC bomb wings, and in the space of 10 minutes, the tornado damaged 71 of their B-36 bombers, rendering them unfit for operational use. General LeMay was thus forced to temporarily remove both wings from the SAC's order of battle. A bit hard to fly a B-36 when it has no tail. So another 10 B-36s parked in the open at the Convair plant located adjacent to Carswell were also damaged. Many of the B-36 had their tails torn off, as that one, and some were further damaged when they were hit by maintenance docks, large maintenance docks, that were picked up and thrown around by the tornado. So, you know, they do a fair bit of damage. The least damaged B-36s were repaired first, with 10 aircraft being returned to operational service within 2 weeks. The 7th Bomb Wing resumed operations 10 days after the tornado hit. Convair eventually rebuilt 26 of the damaged B-36s at its Fort Worth plant, while the Air Force was responsible for repairing the rest. Last rebuild of a tornado-damaged B-36 was completed in May 53. Subsequently, Carswell Air Force Base adopted the practice of dispersing its B-36s to other bases in adjacent states such as Arizona on receipt of severe weather warning or severe storm warnings. The last little section there, the featherweight program. The featherweight program was a series of modifications designed to improve the Peacemaker's survivability in combat, and was achieved by reducing the weight of the aircraft in order for it so that it could fly higher and faster over the target area. These modifications included the removal of all defensive armament except for the tail turret. Hence, 14 of the 16 20mm cannon, 7 of the 8 turrets, plus their fire control equipment, and most of the gunners were removed to save weight. Only the tail turret was retained together with a single gunner to operate it. In addition, all crew comforts were removed from the B-36, including rest bunks, the galley and its electric stove, and all insulation and soundproofing. The final image there is of the last B-36 produced. It was a J model. It came off the production line as a featherweight modification. The last half of the J models were modified on the production line, and it was the last B-36 to be retired from active service in January 1959, and eventually found its way to the Pima Air and Space Museum, where it was fully restored and can be viewed today. You can tell it's a J, or one way to tell it's a J, because the only guns you can see are the tail guns. But even some J's had no tail guns as well. So, you know. Anyway, I think that's it. I've gone just about to time. So if anyone has any questions, yep.
Was that style of engine the only one ever done by the Americans? Have it the backwards, like, you know?
Now that's a good point. A lot of the problems they had with the engines on the Peacemaker were caused because they were positioned as pushers on the back of the wing. With other aircraft like the B-50 and the C-97, which was the Boeing cruiser that you used as a transport and a tanker, the engines were on the front. They were in tractor configuration, and they seem to have had less trouble. But certainly putting the engines on the back of the wing caused some problems. Yep.
The B-35 Flying Wing had those Pratt & Whitneys on the rear end of the rear part of the aerofoil.
That's true.
Yes, that's true. That was the XB 35. It was then re-engined with 8 jet engines,
B-49.
which were more of the... Oh, they were still pushers, yeah, I suppose so. Oh no, they were tractors because the air intake was on the front. But yeah, look, it's same problem. The engine represented the ultimate development of piston engine technology, basically, in the immediate post-war years. The engines fitted to the F, H and J models were slightly uprated from the ones fitted to the D model. They developed 3,800 horsepower, which is a lot of horsepower from one engine. But these things were the bane of the mechanics' lives because each engine had 28 cylinders. Each cylinder had 2 spark plugs. So if you were changing the spark plugs on one engine, you were changing 56. If you were changing spark plugs on all engines, you were changing over 300. So
What was the length of the runway required for these aircraft?
sorry.
What was the length of the runway that was required to get
Oh,
these
okay. When the 36 was first built as a prototype, they actually had to lengthen the Carswell runway, and initially there were only about 3 runways in the US that could take the 36. Not so much because of the length needed, but the fact that the aircraft was so damn heavy that it sank into the runway surface. But eventually, of course, with the use of the single landing gear, single tyre main landing gear, with the 4 tyre bogie, the problem was greatly reduced.
Given that the piston engines used avgas, presumably those turbojets used avgas as well. You were saying they used the same fuel.
The turbojets were modified to use the same fuel as what the piston engines were used. There was only a very slight drop in performance compared to using avgas. So, using jet fuel, JB4 or whatever it is.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Any in existence to this day?
Yes, there are 3 or 4 still in existence. They're all museum pieces. The Museum of the United States Air Force has a J indoors. The Pima and the other one are stored out of doors, which of course is never good for an aircraft, but there's nothing much you can do, Vince.
Growing up in the UK, I actually saw a B-36 in the air.
As a young man,
As a kid.
as a kid, yeah.
I was either 9 or 11, something like that. I
Yeah,
was visiting RAF at Burtonwood.
yeah. Broadwater or Bentwaters? RAF, which RAF station was
It
it?
was Burtonwood.
Oh,
Between
okay.
Manchester and
Yeah.
Liverpool. And it flew over our street and the sky went dark.
Yeah,
I can't remember the noise, but I remember it going down.
would have been
I
loud.
noticed that Convair referred to it as the aluminium overcast.
Yes, it was. Or magnesium overcast because it had magnesium in it.
I'm intrigued that the same engine could handle the avgas and also kerosene, which...
Well, they had to modify the jets a bit so that they took the same fuel as the piston engines. I don't know how they
The
did it, but-
very first jet engine developed by Whittle used petrol.
Was it? So exploding.
Yeah, well, yeah, but it was too dangerous, so they went to something similar to kerosene. But so, yeah, you can use petrol in a jet engine.
I said, when the captain turned around and tells everyone to get out of the aircraft, how did they get out?
Oh, you mean escape from the aircraft? Yeah, good point.
22 crew.
There was a circular crew entry hatch at the back, somewhere around here, I think, where basically that would be jettisoned and they'd bail out manually. No ejector seats, right? There was also an circular entry hatch near the nose, but what they used to do, particularly at takeoff, was they would deploy the turrets that were just behind the cockpit, the forward dorsal turrets, because apparently you could get from the forward compartment out through the turret compartment and away from the aircraft. So that used to be how they do it, and you'd often see pictures of B-36s with just the forward turrets, nothing else deployed at takeoff or sometimes at landing.
That one you spoke about that crashed, did that, it took a while to find it, was that on water or ice or land or what?
The crash in Canada?
Yes.
No, well that was a B-36B bomber. That was basically only had the piston engines. It didn't have any jets at the time. Probably if it had had jets it wouldn't have crashed, because the jets would have given it the additional power to climb above the icing.
But that one that did crash, where did it crash, on land or not?
It crashed on land. They don't know how how it got there. There's a theory that I've heard, again I can't comment whether it's correct or not, that one of the guys stayed on board, the weaponeer stayed on board. Now the weaponeer was the guy who inserted and removed the plutonium core from the bomb, and he was also a qualified B-36 pilot, and the theory goes that he remained behind on the aircraft and turned it around and flew it back over land, and there's some evidence to indicate he was trying to get to a US Air Force base that was located just inside the Alaskan border, but the aircraft didn't make it. And it looked like, before it was blown up, the plane was blown up by the Americans, it looked like the aircraft had been deliberately belly flopped onto the ground to prevent damage and so on. There was no evidence of fire. We don't know what happened to the plutonium core. The Americans won't give any information relating to that.
So they actually armed and disarmed the bomb?
The early ones they did, yes. The later weapons were electronically armed. You had to go through many levels of safety procedures to do it, and activation codes and all sorts of things. But yeah, in the early days they had to be physically armed, as I understand.
Miles,
Yeah.
what was the pilot's opinion of the aircraft? How did they feel about it?
Yep, good question. Generally speaking, most of the pilots whose accounts I've read liked flying the aircraft. The plane was very stable apparently, though control inputs were slow, because incredibly enough the aircraft didn't have power assisted controls. It was all pulleys and wires and so on. So, but apparently it was a good aircraft to fly.
One ever come to Australia?
Oh, I don't know, mate. I've not ever seen any photographs of B-36s in any of the RAF bases here, RAAF bases. They certainly did get to the United States, to the United Kingdom. They were deployed to the UK and to Japan, in Okinawa and Guam on a regular basis after about
We had B-57s coming into Darwin on a fairly regular basis, even though it was just a navigation checkpoint. I was just wondering if they may have flown some down into Australian territory.
They may have done, but well, I've certainly never seen any accounts of that.
Wouldn't have had the runway length.
No, so would have been, but they would have had the right turn around and head back.
Yeah, they certainly would have had the range, but because they could have flown from Guam to here or Okinawa to here and back again. They had that kind of range, but I think maybe none of even the military airfields in Australia at the time may have been able to handle them, because when you look at it, we were still flying Lincolns and the Canberra, I think, sort of was mid-50s, just starting to come into service. So I think maybe that might have been the reason.
I think the B-52s needed an extra long runway before they came to Australia, and I think the first one was Exmouth.
Is it correct that they spent more time in reconnaissance mode after they were given up as bombers?
What happened in 1954, LeMay got the idea that we can use other assets to do reconnaissance. Let's make the reconnaissance wings bomber wings. Now, of course, it wasn't as simple as that, because all of the aircraft that made up the reconnaissance wings had no bombing capability. So they had to go back to Convair and be modified to carry bombs. And they could only be modified to carry bombs in 3 out of the 4 bomb bays, because bomb bay number 1, when they were built, became the reconnaissance capsule or suite, and that contained, it was a manned area with the cameras, and the thing even had a dark room for the loading of films and all this sort of thing, and you couldn't do anything with it, so that was left as it was, and then they had to rejig the other 3 bomb bays to carry bombs. So the B-36 program, actually, when you look at it, was very inefficient, because it was modification after modification, or rebuild after rebuild, and it must have cost hundreds of millions of dollars more than probably it needed to if they got it right in the first place. But anyway, that's the way it goes.
Well, I think we should give Miles a rest. I've just got one question. What's the advantage of a pusher motor?
For a piston engine aircraft, probably nothing, because you get cooling problems with the engines because they're facing backwards. Aerodynamically, I must confess, I really couldn't say.
You don't get the controlled flow of air over the wing.
Yeah.
The tractor engine pushes air over the wing, so even at low taxiing speed, you've got controlled surface.
Yeah.
Oh, I see, okay. Yeah.
That sort of makes sense. Well, thanks for your attention, guys.
Thank you.